Just to start out with some housekeeping items, we are recording this webinar, so you will be able to view it afterwards, and also if you want to forward it on to anybody within your organization, you'll be able to get that via email right after the webinar. And also during this webinar, I want to make sure that you use the questions tab, which is located on the Go to Webinar control panel. We're going to be doing some Q&A afterwards, so be sure to submit any questions you have, and we'll be sure to answer those at the end of the webinar. I'm going to go ahead and do some introductions. Our webinar today is presented by Damian Stevens. He is our founder and CEO, and you'll find his contact information right there should you need to reach out to him for any questions. And my name is Melissa Patterson. I am the Chief Conversation Starter here at Servosity. And if you need to reach me, there is my contact information as well. In our agenda today, we're going to start out with some scary stuff. And that's going to go over kind of where the industry is and what kind of scary stuff we're facing within the backup and disaster recovery industry. And also we're going to discuss, obviously, what is a BDR. We're going to go over the basic optimal BDR builds and the hardware and software and operating systems that are involved with those. And also we're going to discuss why Servosity. Why should you choose us as your partner? Some of us are already partners with you, so we're going to go into some more detailed in-depth of what we can do to provide benefits for your company. And as mentioned earlier, we're going to be going over some Q&A at the end of the webinar, so be sure to submit your questions at any time during the presentation today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Damian Stevens to go ahead and get started.
Great. Thanks, Melissa. Well, guys, I wanted just to start with a little bit of why some of our partners choose us, certainly not an exhaustive list, but just a real brief intro over why Servosity. We do operate a geographically redundant cloud, meaning we keep your client's data or their proverbial eggs in more than one data center or basket. All our facilities are SSAE 16 and SAS 70 Type 2 audited facilities. We back that with 24/7, 365 support at no extra cost, and with real engineers here in the U.S. We support Windows, Mac, Linux, VMware, Hyper-V, and more. And no hardware is necessarily required, including for your BDR. So we'll get into that in just a moment. Our mission is to deliver the mission-critical backup and disaster recovery as a service, specifically to managed service providers and IT resellers, and ideally in a way that makes your brain do a little bit of the happy dance. Let's get into the obligatory scary industry statistics. I won't read these to you, but we have plenty more. We're happy to supply you this information, a copy of the slides, but statistically, it's just not a bet that anybody should make. Most people have auto insurance, home insurance, property insurance, personal liability insurance. They're probably much less likely to use a lot of those than they are the need for some form of backup or disaster recovery or business continuity. You can see from the statistics, 25% of PC users suffer data loss per year. All sorts of statistics that it's very common that data is lost, and the consequences of having a data loss could be fatal to the business. So something they clearly want to pay attention to. So we're talking about things. Let's talk about disaster recovery and the different definitions. So I'm not going to read you this slide, but it's essentially the disaster recovery is what you do to recover after a disruptive event. So everybody thinks hurricanes, fires, floods, mudslides, you know, there's really catastrophic events, and that's the true meaning of disaster recovery. But it's much more statistically likely to be a malfunctioning software caused by a computer virus, and if that causes widespread outages for your business, that's still a disaster. So most people believe in the disaster or think of disasters, and you should certainly plan for the large snowstorm or the fire or flood, but statistically you're going to have much more common things like somebody hitting delete when they didn't mean to, or crypto locker viruses, or other things that are very common today. So even though we're talking about a BDR and what that means, we're going to talk about business continuity and broaden the scope a little bit, right? So business continuity is a broader scope, and kind of in other words, business continuity planning is a more comprehensive approach to make sure your clients keep making money. Whatever the business is, that it continues. So I highly suggest, even though the industry terms are disaster recovery and we're talking about our DR offerings, it's really around business continuity. We're going to talk about how you can blend backup and disaster recovery to really deliver business continuity. Even though we use the DR, it's just what most people are familiar with as the words we're using. It's really something that you can deliver true continuity of service, not just the catastrophic disaster recovery when you have a catastrophic event. So real quickly, what's a BDR appliance? Most people believe BDR stands for Business Disaster Recovery, and an appliance is essentially a dedicated piece of hardware for that. Do you even need a BDR appliance? That's probably one question you should ask. The common reasons people decide to have a BDR appliance boil down to recovery time objective, or RTO, or recovery point objective, RPO. And put real simply, recovery time objective is when something crashes, whether it be a single system or a particular application, or when something's lost, or all their servers or all their infrastructure or the building burns down, how fast until you can get them back into business? Is it 4 hours? Is it 24 hours? Is it a week or longer? Recovery point objective is at what point can you recover the data back to? So when they crash, do you go back to last night's backup and they lose up to a day's worth of data? Do you go back to 4 hours ago, restore point, an hour ago, 15 minutes ago? So obviously in a perfect world, getting people up and running immediately in minutes and restoring back to a restore point from minutes ago in any event would be the ideal scenario. And obviously those are going to be functions of how you set these things up and how you plan. The criticality of your recovery time and the number of servers and the budget are all going to play a role in lowering the RTO and RPO versus raising the budget. We'll talk about some really good ways to do this and wring more value out of this, out of a business continuity offering. So should you build a BDR appliance? The benefits of building them are really kind of twofold, and I'm going to compare them to really the other options. One is to not have one and possibly not get the recovery time you're looking for. Not having any sort of appliance or local device, you may not be able to recover very quickly. It might take you an entire business day or a week, perhaps, depending on the infrastructure and the environment and the complexity of the environment. So having it on site has value. On the other hand, there are a lot of vendors that sell appliances. And so one of the things that we're talking about today is really why might you build your own? There's no right answer for everyone, but just having an open conversation about that. Typically the folks that build their own, and the feedback that we've gotten is it gives them more control over what's going on from a security perspective, from a technology perspective, from a end user experience perspective, more control. It can give you higher margins on your service offering. It can differentiate you in your service offering, which can lead to higher margins. It protects you from vendor lock-in. You don't have to have a piece of hardware from a particular vendor to continue to have this to work. So you can really leverage any hardware, and you can scale the hardware, scaled hardware. So another term is right-sizing the hardware. A lot of solutions that are out there may bundle a BDR appliance, but you only have X number of choices. And when you have those few choices, you end up often under buying or overbuying for what you need. Often it's very expensive. Our take on this is there's really not much value in commodity hardware. So you can scale this to just the right size for your clients, which could be no hardware, some hardware, or lots of hardware. And we're going to get into specifically what that means to tuning this for you and your customers. Let's talk about the hardware options. So things that you can do with our software, the most basic setup, which is rudimentary, but still will allow you to have a reasonably fast recovery. The most basic setup for a client with 1 or 2 servers is you can literally buy that client a USB hard drive. You would take DR images and incremental images to the USB drive and store them on the local client site and push them off-site, of course, as an additional safety measure. But storing those on-site in a USB hard drive gives some good protection for smaller clients with a very, very, very inexpensive price, whatever you can get a basic commodity USB hard drive for nowadays. If you have more than 1, 2 servers, or they're running virtualized environment, or for a whole set of other reasons, a NAS is often a good fit. It doesn't have to be an expensive SAN or anything like that. Just a reasonable quality NAS can allow you to protect the data for 1 server or tens of servers easily. And again, it's the same setup, the more basic setup, where essentially we're taking the images and we're pushing them off-site, but we're keeping a local cache at the client site. And again, the cost of setting this up for each client, the cost of the hardware for each client, is very little. And so we're going to talk about how you use these as we go through these different setups. The optimal setup in terms of hardware is having basically some compute capacity on site for this. So this is what most people call a BDR appliance. It can be the second option, a server or multiple servers, meaning it can be the same class of hardware. So if you've got them a certain Dell server or a certain HP server, if you want to have identical or something very similar there, you certainly could do that. The top options are the most popular. So you can actually get a powerful workstation or a desktop and buy it and put it at the client site, have it storing the data on that machine or on an NAS, and ability to bring that workload up in a virtual machine and have very, very fast recovery. The nice thing about having compute, like we're talking about on this particular slide, available, dedicated to the client, is you could essentially perform a disaster recovery remotely. Their server or servers could crash. You could remote into the BDR appliance with all the backups running and flip them over and boot their machines and run them on the BDR appliance and have them up and running in minutes from the time that you remote in. So it's a very popular option. You don't have to factor in response time or drive time. You just have to be able to remote into your BDR. And so you might buy either a desktop or a server and put it at the client. That gives you the fastest response time because nobody has to drive anywhere, nobody has to bring anything anywhere. That is certainly what you want for clients that demand that want the fastest recovery. We're going to talk about a lot of options in between. So that's the best option. Not worrying about budget, having dedicated server or workstations that are powerful enough to run your workloads dedicated to that client is ideal. The third option, an MSP-owned DR desktop or server. So this is a very popular option with our partners, and the idea of it is that if you sell this for every 10 or 20 companies you sell this to, you might buy 1 or 2 servers or desktops powerful enough to run any workload for any of those clients. And you may leave it at your office and have it pre-configured. That's the big difference. You can have it preloaded, pre-configured with our software and with our recommended settings so that if they crash, if the customer crashes or has a server crash, a data loss, etc., I'll go back to the former slide. With your basic setup in an MSP-owned server, you could basically run out, give the tech that server, and run it out to the client site, deliver it, plug it into the network or the USB drive, depending on which one of these options you go for, and immediately go boot the machine or servers in a DR environment. So this is a little less expensive than buying. If you sell this to 20 clients, if you want to have the fastest, you would sell them each 20 desktops or 20 servers, one apiece. And so this is much less expensive because instead of buying 20 for 20 clients, you might buy 2 and have them sitting at your office as a standby loaner piece of hardware in the case of DR. Plug it into the network to attach to the storage that's on the NAS or the USB drive and allow you to boot up quickly. So these are really the optimal setups. If you have the prior setup and you don't have essentially the equivalent of a loaner standby server at your facilities, then sure, you can recover quickly with our software in terms of bare metal or booting into virtual machines. But what we found is you'll usually end up waiting on hardware, and that might take a few days. It might take a couple of weeks, probably a lot longer than they want to be down. So the idea is to mix and match for the right offering at the right price level and the right recovery time objective for your clients. So a NAS or USB hard drive plus a server or a desktop that you keep at your facility is a sweet spot for a lot of our clients. It's not as expensive and it's not quite as fast as having a dedicated server or desktop at the client site. On the other hand, all you have to do is bring that device out there, plug it into the USB driver network, and minutes after that you can have them recovered and running. So really, really good option that gives you almost all of the bang of having a dedicated piece of hardware or a BDR appliance on site all the time. And so just a super popular one. Now, that being said, there is nothing faster or better than having a dedicated server or desktop on site. A lot of folks recommend servers. If you're running tons of virtual machines and heavy virtualization and complex workloads, you probably need servers. But for a lot of our clients whose typical company is running 1 or 2 or 3 servers or 4 or 5 VMs that could all run on a single machine, what we found is that a lot of times today's powerful desktops that you can buy are sufficient. If it's a quad-core desktop with 16 gigs of RAM and your servers are 2 servers with 4 gig of RAM apiece that you're running as your production workloads, you're going to be able to run that on that desktop machine as far as performance and speed. So consider that your failover can be identical to your server, but also consider for cost reasons that it could be a desktop. So that those are some of the options you have. We'll dive a little bit more into that. So the benefits of kind of the optimal setup, the perfect setup, as far as not looking at costs, is a dedicated BDR server for each customer. That gives you the ideal setup for critical RTO or larger numbers of servers. And what that looks like is they have an event where one or all of their servers crash. Maybe they have a SAN crash, a server crash, multiple servers crash, whatever it may be, hard drives crash, somebody deleted the data. This can cover a whole variety of scenarios, anything where the site didn't burn down, which is much more rare. But what happens is hard drives fail, people delete things, people get CryptoLocker. Any of those scenarios you're covered, you can remote into the BDR device sitting at the client's, always running, always taking backups, and affect essentially a disaster recovery, whether that be for deleting a deletion of one file or a critical database, whether that be bringing up a single server, whether that be bringing up 10 or 20 or 50 servers. You could do that and remote in and not even have to travel on site to make this happen. So the ways that you're going to do that, most popular is boot into a virtual machine. So whether you're running a virtualized environment today or physical, our store allows you to boot straight into a virtual machine, even if it used to be physical. That is the fastest recovery because we can go from backup to booted VM in minutes. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but it's the fastest recovery and it's the most efficient because you could run multiple virtual machines on a single piece of hardware. For example, like my scenario before, if you had 2 small VMs that only needed 4 gig of RAM apiece and you had a desktop with 16 gig of RAM, you could run obviously multiple of those workloads on that same physical piece of hardware. ultimately what you're probably going to use our software to do is a bare metal recovery. That could be your go-to solution in the event of a disaster, but it is probably more likely what you're going to use for the last leg of the disaster recovery. And so bare metal recovery to dissimilar hardware, we'll get into that, but basically what that amounts to is booting off of our boot disk, pointing it at the USB drive and the network share of the NAS, and having it do a restore of all the data. So that takes longer because it's copying all the data than booting into a virtual machine. But you're back on bare metal. You're back as a full system running in production, however you'd like to do it. So for systems that need that, or if that's the way you want to go, that's certainly an option. And these are the sort of things with a dedicated BDR, you just have faster response time than you would with any other setup. Let's talk about what kind of hardware do you really need to build your own BDR. So the first thing I want to say is it doesn't matter if it's a Dell or an HP or some other brand that you like, or a white box that you built, as long as it will run the operating systems and applications you have. It also does not matter if it's a server or desktop class machine. If you need the RAM and the CPUs and you're running big complex workloads, you're going to need probably a server class machine. But a lot of people find that for smaller or mid-sized clients running less demanding workloads, that a desktop is a reasonable DR machine, and it's certainly less expensive. So you might be able to get away with, instead of a server, a desktop. And finally, as we talked about before, instead of buying a desktop or a server for every single client that you provide the solution to, and that being part of the cost structure for them, you could have a standby server at your site where you provide that to them and have all the tools ready to go. That is obviously the least cost, or the most cost-effective, least expensive way to provide disaster recovery and disaster recovery as a service to your clients. So those are the high level. Now, hardware. What kind of hardware do we need? Well, this is really not rocket science. It's really enough to run all your concurrent workloads that you need to run, right? So what do I mean by that? If they're running 5 VMs totaling 40 gig of RAM, 8 gig of RAM apiece or something like that, don't try to run this on a machine with 16 gigs RAM. It's probably not going to be a good idea. It's not going to perform well. So you might be okay with the DR environment being a little slower, 10 or 20% slower, depending on the client's demands. But I wouldn't architect it to really run with less. So think about processors and RAM. Do you have enough CPU cores? Do you have enough threads? Do you have enough RAM in your DR environment or your DR machine that you're going to spec? Secondly, disks. Disks are something people don't pay enough attention to. So reliability is one thing. Performance and IOPS is something that people usually forget. In today's world, where even a desktop comes with a quad-core processor, there's lots of processing power. You can get a desktop with 16 gig of RAM easily. So there's really quite a bit of RAM and CPU to go around. What I want to make sure you realize is that if you had a server that had a quad core and 16 gig of RAM, and it had a RAID 10 array with 20 hard disks in it, or SSD drives in it, and your BDR machine is a nice desktop also with a quad core and 16 gigs of RAM, you might be okay on CPU and RAM. But if it has a single SATA disk in it, whereas the rest of your server is SSD or a large RAID array, you're probably not going to be happy with the disk performance of that particular piece of hardware. So I know this is kind of basic, but often that gets overlooked in the planning and looking at the cost of this. The idea here is whatever is the best hardware solution for you and your clients is what we want you to be able to offer. So you want to plan for 36 months of growth. Usually you're going to buy or look at this on a, whatever your client looks at, a 36 or 48 month hardware refresh cycle or lifetime value of that equipment. Think about that. Sure, they might have 8 gig of RAM today. Are they going to upgrade that RAM in that server? Are they going to have 2 servers? Do you need to go ahead and account for a little bit of growth in terms of processor, RAM, disk space, etc.? So think about that when you grow, that it's not just good enough for today, but that it's good enough for tomorrow's demands. We're talking about hardware. The real goal here is that you shouldn't need to offer 30 different offerings to 30 different customers. If you have 30 customers that are target or are going to use the service from you, just as an example, you'll probably end up with 2 or perhaps 3 kind of offerings. And that's something, if you're a partner of ours, we can work with you to help come up with those based on best practices and what we see across the industry. But we want this to be the right size and the right fit. So what this means is scaling up or down to the needs of the client. So on the really lowest cost end, for a smaller client, you could put a USB drive in and take images, push them off-site, and store them on a local USB drive, and have a standby server that you could bring over, or perform a bare metal disaster recovery to a new piece of hardware that you bought them, if that was what you wanted to do. So on the low end, from a cost perspective, the least expensive perspective, that still gives you very, very fast disaster recovery compared to any kind of file backup or most other forms of backup and disaster recovery. And at the same time, you probably have clients that are on the high end or the mid end. So in the mid end, perhaps you opt for a NAS and a standby server. And then on the high end, perhaps you opt for either a desktop or server or multiple servers, where you want to be able to remote in and bring up any server that crashes within minutes. The idea is to scale this to fit your customer base and their budget and recovery time and recovery point objectives. So those are all something that you want to consider and figure out where is the right fit for my client so that I can give them the best offering. Instead of being chained to one offering or another offering, we only have certain hardware or certain other choices to offer your clients. Let's just think about what kind of software you need to make this happen. Not even talking about Servosity, just what kind of software. You need either some kind of backup or imaging software to make images and incremental images of all the servers that you're backing up. You need the ability to be able to do bare metal recovery to dissimilar hardware. You need to be able to convert to virtual machines or virtual boot any of your virtual machines. You need to be able to do some sort of cloud upload or replication or off-site backups. You certainly don't want to have all of your backups on-site. And then lastly, you're going to need to do monitoring and alerts, hook into your tool sets, your PSA or RMM, configure alerting or dashboards so that you know what's going on, and you can monitor this not only for one client but for all your clients across the spectrum of backup and DR. So think about all the different tools that you need to have that you know need to work and know you need a vendor to support. Now, so this is great. Let's say, hey, I like the idea. I want to provide a BDR appliance to either certain clients dedicated to them, or I want to have one that I can have on standby. What kind of operating system can I use for my BDR? When it comes to what we're doing, and it's going to be it's going to run a Windows OS. You can run a Windows desktop OS or a server operating system. A lot of people don't realize that you can actually be running, let's say, a Windows 7, for example, a desktop license on a powerful desktop machine, quad-core, 16 gig of RAM, and our software will allow you to virtual boot or turn what could have been a physical or a virtual machine into virtual machines, and you could run 2 or 3 servers on that desktop even if you needed to, And even though those are server operating systems, you can run a desktop operating system as the underlying OS and save a good bit of money when you price this out for your clients. That works at the smaller scale. Windows 7 has a limit of 20 connections. So as you're saving backups to it and virtualizing and doing that sort of thing, that's not going to scale once you start to get past a few servers that you're backing up or virtualizing. But if you're talking about 2 or 3 servers, most of our clients go with the desktop OS. If you're going to be virtualizing and running more than a couple of servers, and you want your BDR to be able to bring up more than 2 concurrent servers, you're going to want to opt for the server Windows Server OS. It doesn't matter to us if you like 2008 R2, if you like 2012, whatever you're comfortable with from a server operating perspective or desktop perspective will be fine as a base OS. One of the things that I wanted to also mention is we've talked about a BDR appliance, and again, the BDR, Sensor Business Disaster Recovery, you really want to broaden the scope and talk to your clients about the value of business continuity, not just how do I prepare for this big event that I hope never happens, like a flood or a fire, but how do I keep you running when somebody hits delete on the critical database, when a Windows patch goes awry, when CryptoLocker creeps in right before a holiday and affects all of our data. This is how you want to get them back up and running. And so one of the things about our disaster recovery in our offering is you can really blend backup and disaster recovery. Not everyone can do that. And so we'll talk a little bit about why Servosity. But before I go into some of these details, I didn't want you to lose the fact that a lot of disaster recovery options, they only keep a couple of hours or a couple of days worth of backups or snapshots or versions. And that might be fine for disaster recovery, but for a true backup offering, usually you're going to want to keep weeks or months of versions. We have the capability to do that. That way you can have one solution that ends up being both a backup and a disaster recovery offering, and can really fill the gap for a lot of clients in both sides so that you can restore their files or restore their servers. So we'll get into some of the features we offer, but before we even get into our features, just think about, do you really want to offer a backup offering to give them longer term retention and restore files, and then also have a second option where you're imaging their machines and providing virtualization or bare metal recovery? No, you probably want that in one solution. So why might Servosity be a decent fit for what you're doing? First of all, we're hardware agnostic. That's just a really fancy way of saying we don't sell hardware, and we don't require hardware, and we don't believe hardware is a differentiator, and we don't believe we should charge you extra for hardware. We believe you know how to buy hardware, you understand how to spec it, you spec it for your clients. You can go buy similar hardware or powerful desktop or whatever the right choice is, and you can buy the latest and the greatest and not be locked into whatever offerings we might be reselling if we were providing the hardware. Scalability. A lot of our partners tell us they love the fact that this scales down to small clients that might not normally be looking at disaster recovery, and this can be quite cost effective. A lot of really small, under 10 employee companies now say they can afford disaster recovery. Of course, it works on the mid-end, but also we get just as much feedback about how it works on the higher end. So when you're dealing with larger clients that have tens and tens of servers and multi-complex environments with virtualization, etc., the idea is we don't make you buy more appliances. You can have a lot of flexibility on where to store the data and how to move it off-site and how to virtualize it, working in virtual or physical environments. So we scale to the higher end of large amounts of data and large amounts of servers, and also on the lower end where you can package it and offer it to smaller companies. And that's really where the flexibility comes in, is the right fit for the right customer. Everything that we back up can be backed up locally also to the same network, so the NE-UNC path, the NAS, etc., and to the cloud. You can control all those. In fact, you can even set different schedules and different retention policies. So You can back up more frequently locally and keep more versions locally if that's what you choose, and then maybe push off-site daily or nightly and store less versions in the cloud, really completely in your control. We do have central web management of all devices. So really what that means is whether you're doing disaster recovery, whether you're doing file backup, whether it's Mac, Linux, Windows boxes, you can see them all in a central dashboard, and not just see them, you can manage them, you can view all the reports, you can change the times the backups run. You can really, once you've installed the software, manage it without having to visit that device or remote into it. We also have our central health dashboard, which gives you a overview of all of the devices, devices being servers, desktops, whatever you're backing up for all of not just one client, but all of your clients. It's a centralized portal that shows you at a glance exactly what's going on for every single device at every single client, including when the backup ran, what size it was it successful. It shows you red, yellow, green as far as error, warning, or success on every backup account, on every backup set, and it links directly to their details and reports. So it's kind of your operational picture as a managed service provider over what's going on. Do I have a handle on it? Can I not only do this, can I do this at a decent scale and roll this out and manage it with all the other things I have to manage? Another thing just to mention that we also offer is continuous data protection, which is something that I don't see a lot of folks offering and is just something worth mentioning. So what that essentially means, and we're going to go into some more details here, is we can do very frequent image-based backups as often as every 15 minutes locally or to the cloud. But we can also do continuous data protection and run even faster backups down to sub 1 minute data protection. So for critical workloads or things where you just don't want to ever lose any data, you can run continuous data protection and really protect data in near real time. The features that were really only available to Fortune 500s that had spent hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars on infrastructure now are available for you to run on a server or a laptop. We'll talk a little bit just about our features. I've kind of hinted about them, but the features are you can take an image of your machine or machines and store it locally and even push it to the cloud as often as every 15 minutes. Most people tune this so that you might go off-site hourly or nightly and take backups more frequently locally for cost or bandwidth reasons, but you could push images and incremental images of all your servers off-site as frequently as every 15 minutes. We can back up data and databases, so we can do Exchange and SQL and or Aware. We can do log truncation. One thing I want to mention that's not in the slide is we also have full support for complete granular recovery of Exchange. So if you want to not only restore the server, but to restore any item in Exchange, mail messages, calendar items, etc., you can restore that data and pull it out. In addition, like I said, you can layer CDP in it. So if 15 minutes isn't fast enough, you can actually get down to seconds where data is being sent off site seconds after it's written to disk. And so depending on what you want to do, you can layer this and get the right approach for your clients. Some other things that you can do that we've mentioned in terms of recovery. So we're talking about disaster recovery or business continuity, recovering the servers. It's certainly important. The other thing to know is the backups are also fully browsable. You can mount them in your Windows Explorer as a drive letter. So you can take any one of our backups, any one of the incremental versions, and mount it, and it'll show up as drive E or F or whatever you have in your Explorer, and you'll be able to see it and browse it and copy data out, make tests, restore files. So if you need to restore a folder or set of files without imaging the whole computer, this is your offering. This, along with the advanced retention, gives you more of a backup solution along with a disaster recovery or business continuity solution, and really gives you a full business continuity package and offering, not just DR or just backup. When it comes to recovery, virtual boot is the fastest way. So you can boot a copy of the server even on your laptop. So the virtual boot feature means that any of the backups that are stored can be booted on any number of devices or servers. So if your laptop was powerful enough, you can boot up a test copy of the server and run it on your laptop. You can use, this is what we're talking about, you can also boot this up on a BDR appliance in minutes, go from what was a physical or a virtual machine, it doesn't matter, and restore it and run it. So super popular feature to get you up and running in the event of any kind of outage. Lastly, on the feature side, bare metal recovery, we've talked about it. Similar and dissimilar hardware. Basically, you might virtual boot when you have a downtime event and then run for a day or a week or a month or however long it takes to get replacement hardware. Take your final backups from within that backup environment and then go and do a bare metal recovery where you boot off of a boot disk, and it will cover everything as it was. So you don't have to install Windows, you don't have to reconfigure the networking and the print drivers, you don't have to reload all the applications, Windows applications and data all get recovered onto your new hardware or replacement hardware. And so the bare metal recovery is obviously a critical piece to getting your clients back and operational. And so that might be something you schedule for a planned downtime or a planned cutover from a virtual boot environment to the ultimate environment where you want to put them back on a new piece of hardware. But all this makes this easy, much easier for you and much faster than reloading Windows from scratch and reconfiguring the domain controllers and all the other settings that Exchange and SQL and any other applications require. Finally, we work with VMware, Hyper-V, Zen, VirtualBox. So whether you're physical or virtual, you can back up nearly anything, and we can restore to anything. So what I mean by restore to anything is from a physical to a virtual, from a virtual to a physical, or virtual to virtual. So covered probably almost any in Windows environment that you could imagine in terms of our disaster recovery, the ability to back it up and restore it. So really just last slide or two, wrapping up here, I wanted to talk about the big thing is recovery time objective. What does this mean? I know your clients may not be asking and using those words specifically, but differentiate yourself and your service offerings based on your knowledge and your ability to deliver a good recovery time objective. And the point of building your own BDR appliance or considering that is you could offer a similar quick recovery time objective of 4 hours or minutes that somebody else might charge $10,000 or $20,000 to set up and $1,000 a month. You might offer for almost no setup and a half the cost. So this is something that you can get the kind of enterprise grade recovery and speed without necessarily having to invest in high-end SANs and replication and duplicate data centers. So you can recover a VM with our virtual boot feature in just minutes. A click of a button. I certainly invite you to try that and see it for yourself. So any environment can be booted within minutes, and then you can recover it from there. And then you can recover that virtual environment, like we said, with a bare metal recovery to new hardware. So get them up and running fast. They will certainly love you for that. And then you can plan for whenever your hardware manufacturer ships you another server, and you can plan the cutover and do this and make it a non-disruptive event for your client. So talk about the speed at which you're able to do these things and do them in a way that differentiates you from your competition. So go ahead, please submit any questions you have. This is in summary. What you should be offering, whether it's through Servosity or not, is some combination of backup and disaster recovery, and essentially turning that into a real business continuity offering. So I can recover your operating system and your servers if you have a crypto locker or a virus or theft or deletion, kind of a disaster or fire flood, but also I can recover you in the event of a backup type scenario. I need to restore a file, I need to restore a folder, something corrupted, something a patch didn't take. So a real culmination of providing all these in one. So I'm going to turn it over to Joel, and we'll take it from there. All right. Apparently one of the questions is where did Joel go? So apologize for the technical difficulties. So go ahead and submit your questions now, guys. I know that he's going to be getting on the line, dial back in right now. Submit your questions, and we'll get to as many of those as possible.
Hey, guys.
And hey, Joel, I was just telling them to submit their questions, and then as far as next steps go, I'll let you take it from here, and then we'll go on to Q&A.
Great. Really appreciate that. Guys, I just wanted to, well, first and foremost, thanks, Damien, for presenting today, and then also for you guys taking a few minutes out of your time today to spend with us. There have been a lot of questions actually coming through during the webinar today, so if we're not able to answer all of your questions, I want to be clear that we will be sending out emails to you to actually answer those questions if we can't do that over the webinar today. So, but also, so we can go ahead and get started here, we'll go ahead and get started with the first question that came in. Damien, it says, with your recommended optimal setup for the BDR appliance, the one, I guess they're talking about the one that's pre-configured in the office that you have on hand, do you recommend offering a service level agreement? If so, what kind of time are you talking about specifically?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you could and perhaps should offer a service level agreement with any of these offerings. Obviously, a dedicated piece of hardware is going to allow you to have the fastest recovery and offer the best recovery time or the best service level agreement. And so you'll be able to test this, and whether it's 1 or 10 machines, you can boot a machine in minutes. I wouldn't offer an SLA of minutes because you want to plan for once they log a ticket, how long does it take for you to get a qualified engineer to be able to remote in? And once you boot in things like Exchange recovery environments, they can take some time to boot into just the way that Exchange and Windows works. But the point is you should strongly consider, whether you do or don't, offering a service level agreement. This will differentiate you from your competition almost every single time. What I mean by that is tons of people say they have backup or DR and they don't really communicate to the client why they're any different. If you don't communicate how you're any different, you're probably going to get undercut by somebody that's leaving a lot out. And the service level agreement will set you apart. So specifically, some of our partners will say there's a 4-hour or 4 business hour recovery. That's probably on the more aggressive side. You could be faster, but 4 hours might be one. Another one might be 8 business hours. Another one might be 1 business day. So now that you have this technology, you can now package it and give them this offering if you want to say, when you crash, we're going to put you back up and running if you have something where you haven't had your whole site lost, and we will recover you and have you up and running in 8 business hours or 4 business hours, whatever is appropriate for you. And that will really get their attention. Even if they don't understand virtual machines and all the things that we're talking about, they will see these guys say they can have me up and running in 8 business hours as a guarantee or as a service level agreement, and all these other guys say, yeah, we'll get you running, but they don't have any kind of expectation or time frame or guarantee. That will set you apart from your competition.
Thanks, Damien. So the next question comes in from actually one of our current partners today, and Damien, it says, I currently use the standard and professional software. I haven't used the DR. I'm kind of still unclear on what that does compared to the professional and the standard.
Sure. Great question. So we have our standard professional offering, which is basically desktop and server grade backup, but it's around file and database system state type backups. So our traditional backups of standard professional kind of file and database level are there. The reason they are here or are still on offering we offer is they solve the problem of I'm not going to lose your data. I've got it protected, whether it's Exchange or a laptop. I've got your data protected, on-site, off-site, etc. So you're solving the protection of losing their data, or you're solving the problem of, hey, I don't want to lose my data. And that's probably the minimum, certainly the minimum you should do for your client. Up a step from that is offering a true DR, disaster recovery or business continuity offering, and what we're calling our DR server and DR desktop offerings. Basically, it's a desktop and a server version. It gives you all the features of our Pro, but adds on this imaging capability, incremental imaging, the ability to turn a machine into a virtual machine and boot it very quickly. One thing I didn't touch on is we can take any physical or virtual machine and also convert it to Microsoft VHD for Hyper-V or VMDK for VMware and drop that right into your virtual environments for recovery. So the DR versions basically solve a higher order problem. Great. Not only am I not going to lose your data, which is the core of what you should be offering, but for those folks that it makes a big enough difference or a big enough impact to their business, now you can say, I will have you up and running faster. So with a file and a database backup, you can restore their data, but you're going to have to reload and install Windows. You might have to get another piece of hardware. You may have to install Exchange, a domain controller, reconfigure it. You could spend easily a day or two on a single server to get them back up and operational. So they could easily have a couple days downtime. And if cost is their number one concern, you would want to continue with, for example, our professional version. If the cost of downtime is enough to offset the little additional cost for our DR version, the DR version is going to give you a mirror image of everything you have. And when that server crashes, instead of having to reload Windows, install all your applications, reconfigure your domain controllers, then restore their data, then they're back up and running, you can click virtual boot and have them up and running in minutes, or you can do what we call a bare metal recovery, which will on any hardware that is compatible, it will load basically a replica or a mirror of what they have in terms of the operating system and the applications and the data. So in short,
so I think we lost Damien on there for just a second. I think he got cut off. But as he dials back into the webinar, thank you for answering that, Damien. And we'll go ahead and take the next question. And this next one that's actually coming in is actually, this is the question. It says, I have some clients that are willing to invest in bare metal recovery or a BDR locally. How would I position this to my clients that are actually budget constrained to push large images off site?
Yeah, so great question. Essentially, I think around clients have a lot of data and don't want to spend a lot of money pushing the data off site. Again, our solution kind of offers the customization you might need to fit these kind of things. So a lot of times it's kind of an all or nothing proposition. With our software, you can do things like image all of their data and store it locally, and then only push, let's say, a subset of their data, their most critical data, off-site. So it allows you to be very selective, so it's not all or nothing in terms of the data that you push off-site. And that matters if they're particularly cost-conscious and they want some of the benefits of DR, but yet not all of the costs. And so what that allows you to do is say, hey, we're not going to do DR images on-site and off-site because it may be in a particular case where they're really storage-heavy user that they don't want to spend the money to replicate everything off-site. But you could say, hey, we're going to put this BDR appliance on site, and if you have anything less than a site loss, we're still doing imaging. We still have all the goodness that we've talked about today in terms of recovery in minutes. You got all those things at your fingertips, and we'll be able to provide that for you. And yet, however, hey, if your building burns down, if you have a catastrophic site loss, something like that, we're only going to push some of your selected most critical data off-site and not all the images. So for example, if they're talking about 4 terabytes of data, if they replicated all their images, it might only be 20% of that, 800 gigs, that they really need that's super critical off-site. So you could select just the most critical data, push that off-site, and not have to push everything off, that essentially makes the total cost of this so much less, really almost not very little more than your existing kind of file backup solutions. And so you can certainly do a hybrid where they can get 90% of the goodness of a DR offering, and then only if they have a site loss would you have to reload Windows or something like that. Compare that to if you're pushing all their data offsite and storing all their images offsite, you would be able to wouldn't have to reload Windows, even if their whole site burned down. You would be able to restore, get the data shipped to you, restore it quickly. So tons of options there. We don't want to make this too complicated. It's not rocket science, but just know that we're happy to help you customize this in a way where you have one or two or at most 3 offerings is what's typical, to go to your customers and say, hey, depending on what you need, we have this at this price point, a middle option at this price point, and a lower price point where you have less. And that's particularly valuable to set those expectations even if they choose the lower price offering, because then they don't expect you to have them up and running in an hour or two if you have to rebuild the server from scratch.
Great. Thanks, Damien. The next question actually, it says, I'm currently doing some file and application-based backup. For example, I'm backing up an Exchange database. However, I may want to offer this DR offering to them. And it says specifically, can I offer some type of trial to them who may consider DR with maybe a BDR appliance, or what do you recommend?
Yeah, so we offer, if you're a partner of ours, we offer trials that you can offer at no charge to your customers. And so it's probably something they're going to want to commit to long term, not change every other month. But if it's something they're not sure of, they don't know if you can do it, they're not sure if you can execute on it, it sounds too good to be true, not sure if it'll work in their environment, you can try this. You can try this software, you can try this setup, you can take backups of their environment and then show them how you can click in minutes, bring up a replica of it and let them see it, touch it, and see that their data is there. There's nothing like seeing it work in real life to separate you from what most people offer. And that's a great question. I just wanted to, the last thing I wanted to bring up was testing. If you test and actually show your clients that this works, you'll separate yourself from most of the other folks out there.
Great. Thanks, Damien. So we're going to actually take one more question here, and then if, like I did say before, if you did submit a question and it wasn't answered while we are on the webinar today, we will be sending out an email to you here shortly to answer any questions that you had. Damien, the last question here, actually, it says, I think I heard you say that you can restore individual files and folders in the DR software. Does this mean that I have to restore or convert the entire image to do this?
Yeah, really good question. So the cool thing is, no, that you get the best of both worlds with our DR offering. And what that means is traditionally you could back up the entire server, but that meant if you had to do a restore, you had to restore the entire server. And if you need to restore the entire server, like if the server crashed, that's fantastic. However, if you're backing up the entire server and somebody deletes one file or folder, you probably don't want to have to go through recovering an entire server, especially if it's working. So you can actually mount any of our backup images right in Windows Explorer and browse that data and copy it out, just like you'd copy a folder from one folder to another as a restore. And so you get the best of both worlds. You can restore individual data as well as the entire server with our DR edition.
Thanks, Damien. Well, we really appreciate all of you guys attending today. If you guys have any questions or you need to maybe take the next step and figure out how to get started with our DR software, feel free to reach out to us at 1-800-429-0500. You can always ask for me. My name is Joel Hinton. I'm one of the partner associates here at Servosity. Feel free to go to servosity.com/webinars and sign up for the next one. Again, we appreciate everything. And And until next time, see you then.